Low ball in, Harry Wilson. Yeah! Oh yes! Oh yeah! Across the face of goal, headed in. Yeah! What a wonderful goal from Harry Wilson. It's been coming. Off you go!
After the game, babies are made.
Hello and welcome to the That's So Craven podcast, your one-stop shop for all things Fulham. We are back. It's the international break, so we've got something a little bit different today, the Tactical Lowdown with our friend Kish from Cottage Tactico, here to discuss all things tactics. Let's start with you, Kish. How are we going today?
Yeah, not too bad. It's good to be on international duty with Australia. Like I said online earlier, had a few injury concerns coming into this one, so sorry we've had to delay, but good to finally be here.
What a professional intro that is. Love it. Thanks very much, Kish. Good to have you. Dad, how are we going tonight?
Yeah, good to be here and great to have you on, Kish. Not that it's not great to see you, Skibby, or Jack, but yeah, nice to have a pro in the house. And I'm just trying to keep my energy levels up, to be honest. I had a long day yesterday, which was very enjoyable.
A big happy birthday to Pod Daddy, turning a youthful 38 yesterday. Congratulations. Skibby, how are we going today?
Yeah, I'm all good. No one wants to hear me speak, let's be honest. It's all about Kish. We want to know the ins and outs. Everyone knows about our kind of pub chat. We want to actually hear some facts, some figures, and some actual know-how. So I'll keep it brief, but I'm glad to be here. Happy birthday, Pod Daddy, and yeah, let's go. I'm salivating. Come on.
Let's get into the good stuff. Well, let's get through the usual business. Just a quick shout out again for the Discord. We're fortunate as well to have Kish in the Discord with Cottage Tactico, giving us loads of insight into Fulham's tactics this season. Some really good questions from the Discord as well for today's podcast. So please do jump into the Discord. You can find the links everywhere on Twitter, on Blue Sky, everywhere you find our links in our link tree as well. A big shout out for Blue Sky as well, something that a lot of Fulham people have recently migrated across to. Do check us out. We're at cravenpod.com on Blue Sky. You can also find Skibby, Elton. We'll get Dave and Sam there, and also Kish, Cottage Tactico on Blue Sky. So please do make sure you follow. You'll be able to find on our page, we put together a starter pack. Cottage Tactico is involved in there as well. It's a quick follow all for a bunch of really good Fulham accounts to start your timeline off right. So please do get across to Blue Sky. It's looking really promising early doors as a really good place for all things Fulham. And finally, Kish, just an intro for yourself as well. And like I've mentioned already, please do make sure you follow Cottage Tactico on Blue Sky and on Twitter. Amazing content there. You'll find it pushed through to our Discord regularly as well. But Kish, for those who don't know you, why don't you just give us a brief overview of what you sort of do on your account and what you're all about?
Yeah, so it's been a couple of years now that we've been up and running, and the idea is basically to try and provide some sort of structured analysis of Fulham games from a tactical perspective that perhaps you don't get that often. So often you might see on Match of the Day or the like, Fulham's analysis slot afterwards often includes sort of the lines of, well, Alex Iwobi's having a good season. I wonder if he'll sign for anybody next year. And that's about all you get. Or, gosh, weren't Man United terrible today when Fulham managed to beat them 1-0 at Old Trafford? Or whatever it is at the time. So it's just trying to give us a bit more detail into what we're doing, what our tactics are, what's happening in games and what individual players are getting up to. And the view is very much to try and use the data and the analytics to enhance what people are seeing with their eyes. We're not trying to just pull out stats for the sake of it and just make everything seem like it doesn't make any sense anymore. We're trying to make things that we're all watching make more sense by slowing it down or taking it out for a bit more consideration. So yeah, that's the vibe. Lots of graphics, lots of screen grabs, lots of numbers, lots of nerdy stuff, and almost entirely about Fulham.
Yeah, it's an amazing account to follow. And I think the last time we had you on as well, we sort of discussed it, how you watch Fulham and you kind of understand bits and pieces and you can sort of see what's going on. But when someone actually sits you down and explains it to you and walks you through what is actually going on the pitch and why things are just clicking, it makes a massive difference to your understanding and your enjoyment of the game as well. Because when you see a tactic actually coming off and it's an idea out of Marco's brain and you see it actually working on the pitch, it makes a massive difference to your enjoyment of actually watching the game and watching the results come. So it's a hugely appreciated service that you give to us all. I I know so many people just appreciate actually seeing all of that stuff being pumped out, and those threads you put out post game just to analyze what actually happened and why we got the results we did and what went right, what went wrong. It's incredible stuff. So we really appreciate it. And look, let's jump into it. You've prepared a couple of slides for us. I'll pull up the first one, and maybe you can just walk us through what we're seeing here.
Yeah, so what I've tried to do, because I think 11 games in is a pretty good time to take stock of what Marco's game model is this year, what he's trying to do. And look, to all intents and purposes, Fulham are going pretty well. And the thing that's different, I think, this season as opposed to last season is that in previous seasons, Fulham have been performing pretty well, but the underlying numbers haven't been as good. And a lot of analysts have been saying, oh, well, at some point, Fulham are going to regress back to the mean and they're going to not be looking as good as they have done under Marco. That's not the case this season. This season, Fulham are actually incredibly, even though we're in seventh, we're underperforming our expected numbers. You know, we could be as high as second on some models based on what we're doing on the pitch. So I thought it was a good time to check in on what we're doing. And I think the thing that's really notable this year is that our defensive numbers are very, very good. Previously, that's been the thing that we've been overperforming the most. So the numbers have suggested our defense shouldn't be that great, and we've done all right. Whereas this time, our defense is looking really good, and the numbers say, yes, our defense is really good. We're not just relying on Bernd Leno to bail us out like we have done in previous years. And usually when teams' defenses improve, you say, well, the reason the defense must have improved is because they're being more defensive. That isn't the case for Marco Silva. Marco has always been a risk taker. He likes to throw players forward. You'll often see a lot of teams leave 3 centre-backs or 3 defenders back at all times, even when they're building up and when they're in settled possession and attacking. Marco doesn't do that. He leaves 2 centre-backs. What I've tried to put together is sort of 4 examples of where you can see the same structure and the same pattern of play in what Fulham are doing, which is 2 centre-backs back. And then the way that we attack, I think, is something that people are quite used to now, which is Marco tries to create these wide triangles. So you have a playmaker on the ball, out on the left or the right. And you have one player going outside of them, one player going inside of them. And they sort of all interchange and rotate all the time. And the aim of the game is to try and get into the half space. So that's the bit sort of just on the edge of the penalty area. Get into that space to try and get a shot off or to try and get a cross into the box. And then the 3 players who are on the other side of the pitch, so not the 3 who are in the triangle where we have the ball, but their sort of respective 3 on the other side, then try and attack the box. And that is basically what Fulham's game model looks like. And if you're able to cycle through all 4 of them, actually, Jack, you can see that there's lots of different examples of this. So we'll come back to them in more detail. But the first one, for those who are on YouTube and watching this, you can see. If you're on podcast, you need to have a look at some of the pics we'll put out afterwards, I guess. The first one was on the left-hand side. So Alex Iwobi was conducting things, and we had 3 in a triangle. This time you have Adama Traore putting the ball into the box. This is for Raul Jimenez's goal against Newcastle. You can see Kenny Tete and Andreas are providing the support for him in a triangle. We have 3 players attacking the box, back post, centre of the box, near post. And then if we go to the next one, you can see the same again. So this is when we're trying to break down the most disgusting low block in all of football against Brentford. You can see that here there's the wide triangle on the left. They've just played the ball into Alex Iwobi, but that's Smith Rowe, Jedi and Nelson. And then you've got 3 players in the box. And then finally, even against Manchester City, same vibe, 3 players out wide. Here, Raul Jimenez is actually rotated with Andreas, so he's the wide player. This is just for his back heel assist, actually. You can see Iwobi and Kenny Tete are supporting in that triangle. Then you've got 3 players attacking the box and 2 players outside of it. So you can see again and again and again, we're getting into the same structure on different sides of the pitch. And then what we can do is we can go back through each of them and we can look at what each of the players, their responsibilities are in that structure. And it might help us understand a little bit of what Marco's trying to do and why certain players are having good seasons or are more involved in what Fulham are doing this year than before. So yeah. I mean, I guess a lot of that's quite familiar, right? The sort of the triangle stuff we're used to, and Marco getting it out wide and playing it there.
Do you think there's something in particular that needs to happen in terms of the way we play, though, to get ourselves into these positions as well? We're setting up really nicely, but do you feel like there's a particular style of play that is required to get ourselves into these positions and a sort of focus that Fulham are looking to focus on?
Well, I think you need to have wide playmakers who are capable of making the play in these situations, and that's why I think Alex Iwobi has been absolutely fundamental to everything Fulham has done this season. Emil Smith-Rowe similarly, but I think what's interesting about this is that for previous seasons we often said that Fulham really struggled when they had lots of the ball, and we were much better attacking in sort of fluid counterattacks than we were at breaking teams down and settle possession. This is a settled possession structure. This is how we try and break teams down once we've got control of the ball. So we're not reliant on necessarily counter-attacking all the time. And I'd also say that you can get to this position of settled possession in different ways. So yes, you could play it through the thirds and you could build out from the back and have lovely little patterns that try and cut teams open and create space. And Fulham still try and do that. And they're still very good at doing that. But you can also get to a place of settled possession like this from going long and winning a second ball, and then everyone assembles into this position higher up the pitch. So what Marco's done, I think, by emphasising this sort of dynamic, a settled possession dynamic, the sort of thing that we try and do again and again to break teams down when we have the ball in their area rather than waiting for them to make a mistake or something, is that we're not reliant on the opposition doing any particular thing. We can get to this position in different ways. And I think that's a big difference this season.
Question, Kish. I'm fascinated as to how your mind works to kind of build these patterns, or how you go about it actually, and whether you watch the game as a story unraveling, or whether you watch the game as a set of chess pieces moving, or whether you go to the data, look at the data, analyze the data, and then realize kind of what is happening and forming in detail. And that's my first part. So how do you actually form these views that you share with us? And then secondly, Premier League teams, elite teams have people in back rooms that do this stuff, and there must be, well, we must assume that every single other Premier League opponent would have people capable of building these kind of pictures of how Fulham play in different phases, how they play with the ball, without the ball, and so on and so forth. And if that is the case, so that every team is in fact predictable because everyone knows how each other play and understand that, and they also understand the individuals involved, why is what we are doing, why are we having success with this when it's kind of like, it's a Shakespearean play, you know how it's going to end, you know what the middle bit is, but still you're kind of fooled by it or confused by it. Why are we succeeding with these plans?
So let's do this backwards, because you're absolutely right. The Premier League is ruthless, and there are analysts who do these things professionally to a much higher standard than me all the time, and they're aware of what we do. I think what we have from Fulham now is a team that can beat you in different ways. So take this example here that we're looking at on the YouTube live stream. And if you're listening along, this is Fulham against Leicester at home. So we've got three players out wide on the left-hand side working the play. Now, Leicester could overcommit and they could push loads of players across over to their right-hand side to try and defend. But if they do that, we've spoken before about Fulham's play from previous years, is they'd suck everybody over to one side, then they'd swing it back the other side and attack directly down that side. This is in the Adama Traore era of Fulham's team this year as well, right? So if you overcommit to try and deal with this pretty dangerous triangle of Smith-Rowe, Iwobi and Jedi, very quickly there's players like Sasa Lukic supporting the play who can spread the ball out to Adama and he can attack directly down the other side. So Fulham have got different ways to beat you now. They can still be the team that runs counter-attacks. They can still be the team that tries to cut through you with build-up patterns. They can be the team that tries to play through you in a wide triangle with individual player quality, or they can be the team that sucks you in and then spreads it out to the other side and gets behind you that way. So I think every football team and every elite level football team have multiple ways of playing a game. And I think the one that Fulham really struggled with was settled possession. That was the bit that we just didn't have the individual player quality and the game plan to break teams down. And I think that's what's been addressed this year, and that's what makes us a much more competitive and compelling team. And I think it's also what makes Marco Silva a more compelling prospect as a manager to other clubs, because this is the more sort of proactive possession-based football that those clubs crave, right? So that's how I think why it's being successful, at least.
Do you think there's
Just to-
a particular player who has sort of pushed that on this season? Obviously, Smith Rowe coming in. Do you think that's made a big difference?
Yeah, and look, I think that I think I might have spoken to you guys about this last time I was on. That like there is no magic wand for how to break down a low block. Right, we found out against Brentford like how hard that can be when a team is as well drilled and stubborn and disgustingly set up to not really bother going forward. So, you know, individual player quality makes a huge difference, and also, and this is why I think that one of the things I wanted to get on to chatting to you guys about, which is the choice of players within this system this season. If you are going to throw players forward like this, and you're going to take the risks that Marco is taking, yes, you're trying to create chances and you're trying to be proactive and aggressive and attacking. But if you give the ball away in situations like this, we're leaving a lot of space behind that teams could get into. So you have to have the trust that your creative players, the players who are going to make a difference and take that chance and take a risk, are also quite safe and secure on the ball. And I think players like Iwobi and Smith Rowe are those players, that they are both creative and can make something happen out of nothing, but they're also not wasteful and erratic. And that's quite a hard thing to balance. And they're really, really good at that.
Yeah, makes sense.
No, I fully agree with that. And I guess in turn as well, we saw Andreas sitting in the role that Smith Rowe is playing this season. Do you think the reason Fulham are now sort of almost underperforming statistically, and yet still doing very well, is because we've now got someone like Smith Rowe in the side and Pereira's been able to drop into a different role?
Yeah, I just think we're a more complete side, and I think look, Smith Rowe's quality. I think we're only just starting to see really the full potential that he has for us, and I think no one's really doubted that it was there, but it's taken a little bit of time to get up to speed, and we're seeing him do it for full games rather than for sort of brief moments within a game, and that makes a huge difference. But there's been a big structural change in what we're asking our midfield to do. And Andreas is a huge part of that. And look, why don't we start having a look at that with some of these pictures, right? So in this first one against Leicester, you can see that Andreas is basically on the edge of the D and he's getting ready to go and attack the box. And behind him, you have Sasa Lukic supporting the play, and you have Kenny Tete actually tucked in, almost like a defensive midfield player screening. He's coming in a bit narrow. If you go to the next one, you can see that we're now playing down the right-hand side. Andreas is joining the wide triangle on the right-hand side. And you can see Jedi at left-back has now sort of come inside to sit with Sasa Lukic, and they're screening the play. So they're there to counter-press and to win the ball back and to sustain the attack should this break down. If you go to the next one after that, so this is now against Brentford, you can see that I think at this point, Andreas Pereira has gone off and Alex Iwobi is playing in the middle of the park. So Iwobi is basically in the box. He's attacking the box. He's just come short to collect it. And Smith Rowe's making the play on the left-hand side. Again, Kenny Tete has come inside with Sander Berger. And so these are all our normal sort of setups. But we did something slightly different at City, which we'll come to. But if we just go back to what we were thinking about with Andreas in that first slide to start off with, what are we asking Andreas Pereira to do this year? We're asking him to either attack the box when the player's on the left-hand side, or when the player's on the right-hand side, like in the next slide, we're asking him to support the play in wide triangles. We're not asking him to sit and screen as a defensive midfield player in a pivot. That's just not what he's being asked to do. That's not what that role is. In fact, we're asking our left-back or our right-back, who happen to be incredibly athletic, incredibly tenacious, and really good at tackling, to take on that responsibility. So there's been a change there. We've changed what we want our midfield to do, and we've basically made that work, I think, by bringing Kenny Tete back into the side. And Tete's tenacity really has been the answer to the departure of Joao Palhinha more than anything we've done in our midfield.
Well, I can throw to one of the questions that we had. I think it's come from a couple of different platforms, actually, but I did see this one come in. Thoughts on Tete versus Castagna, and what does each one offer that the other doesn't? And I think you've sort of half answered the question there, but if you want to go into a little bit more depth on why Kenny's been preferred this season.
Yeah, and look, I think I'm a regular contributor to other podcasts, and I think we've talked about this a lot. That Timmy Castagna did nothing wrong, right? He had a really good season for us. and found himself out of the team. I think part of that was just the fact that he happened to play longer in the Euros, and that meant that he came back a bit late. But if you're asking your right back to come inside and to be primarily a ball winner, again, if we just go back one slide, if I just show you the space for those of you watching on YouTube. So Lukic is essentially supporting the play here on the left-hand side. If Alex Iwobi gives that ball away, Sasa Lukic is going to engage in a counter press. So you're going to have Iwobi, Jedi, Emil Smith-Rowe and Lukic are all going to just congregate over on that left-hand side trying to win the ball back immediately. As soon as Lukic goes over there, the only player patrolling that middle of the park in front of the two centre-backs is Kenny Tete. So if they play through that initial counter press and it ends up coming into the middle of the pitch here where Jamie Vardy is or where Bobby can get out to for them, Kenny Tete is your best bet at trying to get across there and slow them down and harry them and tackle them. Now, that's something that he is uniquely well suited to doing because he's just an absolute dual machine. It's something Jedi can do really well as well, right? Because he's just really quick and really good at tackling people. I mean, Timmy Castagna can do that, but that's probably not what he's best suited to doing. So I think Tete's reintroduction into the team has come about with a shift in what we are asking that right back to do. And that's where I think it's interesting to come back to what we did against City. So if we look at the last example of these triangles, which is against Manchester City, in this example, and this does happen, by the way, when we play 4 at the back, it doesn't just happen at 5 at the back, like we did against Man City. Here, Kenny Tete is supporting that wide triangle, and he's part of the play. And because we've got a double pivot in Berger and Lukic, they're the ones who are sitting in that 2, waiting to tackle people should we lose it. And that's something that perhaps Timmy Castagna is better suited to. And I think it's interesting that Marco brought him on in the second half to try and make something happen going the other way. And he maybe got done for their goal, but was seen as an attacking choice to help us in the final third. So it's less sort of, and this is why I think taking apart game plans and stuff like that, this is so useful because it's less where players are lined up and what we're asking them to do. If you're asking your right back to join the final line and to be essentially a right winger and to get balls into the box and to try and create play in a wide triangle, then maybe Castagna makes a lot of sense. If you ask them to be a tackling machine, Kenny Tete is probably your guy.
Yeah, it's
Kish,
interesting.
I'm not sure if this is a jump ahead or sideways, but obviously there's Andres Pereira has been the subject of a lot of criticism and a lot of debate, and he's divided opinions. And I'm just wondering whether you're of the view that everyone is actually judging him on unfair criteria, and that actually Marco, in judging him in a very conventional sense of what we think an 8 should be doing, and whether you think Marco, he's actually learning a plan and actually doing that quite well, and probably very, very well on track for what Marco's looking for, and in fact we're all missing it.
Look, I think a bit of both. I'm interested to hear from the panel on this because I know Skivvy's got a good track record as being part of the Andreas Defence League with me over previous seasons, and not just because of set piece numbers, I'd point out. But look, on Andreas, there's no doubt that he's slightly out of form, right? I don't think even his biggest fans at the club are going to say that the Andreas we're seeing now is playing as well as he has done in previous seasons, regardless of what he's being asked to do or what position he is. He just doesn't look as confident or as happy as he has done in previous years. Doesn't mean he's terrible, but he's not hitting the heights. And look, Marco himself, and the fan base loved to sort of this mythology of him being Marco's golden child and never being dropped and the rest of it. Marco basically called him out in a press conference and was like, look, he's not playing as well as he should do, but I believe in him. So I think Marco's also aware that he's a little bit low on confidence and a little bit out of form. So that's just true, and I'm not trying to debate that. In terms of what he's being asked to do, though, what are his roles in this system as we see it? When we have the ball, his roles are to work the play out wide in a triangle, get into the box, counter press. Those are the 3 things that 8's being asked to do. It's really what we'd expect a 10 to do in a lot of traditional systems. That is just what it is. If that's what Marco wants that position to do, and he's taken the view that he wouldn't mind losing a little bit of heft in the middle of the park in order to have it, I think the only players in our system, in our squad, that make real sense to do that are Andreas Pereira and Alex Iwobi. That is not what Sasa Lukic is good at doing. Sasa Lukic is a brilliant football player. He was my player of the season before he got injured. I thought he was playing unbelievably well. and there's a lot of clamour in the fan base to get him back in the team alongside Sander Berge, and I'm sure we'll see that in some games. But if this is what he wants that position to do, I think it's understandable why he's gone to Andreas in the first instance for that. I'd quite like to see Alex Iwobi have a go at doing it at some point, but that's maybe one for a bit later on in the pod.
No, I think I completely agree with that, to be honest. And it's something that I've been trying to kind of get out in the open, in these podcasts, is the role that he's doing is almost a mixture of Sasha Lukic and Emil Smith-Rowe. It's like he's not doing the full attacking that Smith-Rowe is, but he's not doing the full defending that Sasha Lukic is doing. He's doing kind of both roles, and it's a really hard ask, I think, for a player who has basically been our number 10 for the last sort of couple of seasons to be like, right, you need to be way more defensive, but also do everything that you're doing, and it's quite a huge ask. And sometimes I do feel like it's just a real kind of, well, a big ask, but also, like Kish said, who in this team can do that? And I know there's been all this call of, when Sasha Lukic is fit again, it'll be him and Berger, it'll be fantastic. All the positions that we've just seen of in and around the box, being a real nuisance, picking that deadly pass kind of thing, I can't see Sasha doing that. I mean, we saw elements of when he played with Polina last season that, Sasha Lukic went a bit missing at times. He has got these fantastic stats, and don't get me wrong, this season, you're quite right, he was fantastic at sort of breaking up play, getting the ball, recycling it almost. I know he was sort of has some stats around progressive yardage, but for me, it was always the safe pass. He's very good at picking and sort of keeping the ball rather than sort of picking that more adventurous pass that Andreas is probably more known for. I think it would be a real backward step, unless we're playing someone like Man City where we're not going to have the ball, to sort of bring in a Berger and Lukic pivot, as it were. But yeah, I mean, Kish, that makes great sense of bringing Iwobi in. I mean, what's your view? I mean, we looked at kind of like on the ball of where Andreas kind of sits in that kind of attacking sense, but what do you see in kind of like the off the ball? So where we're now sitting back in our defensive position, we've kind of got Lukic or Berger sitting almost level with Andreas Pereira, and that's probably the times where I don't see him as comfortable. He doesn't seem to be that kind of defensive unit. Is that probably where you see his kind of downfall, or potentially where he needs to be sort of a bit more on the ball, look after it a bit better, and kind of increase those defensive actions?
I mean, yes, and I think that, look, you basically, if we say that we ended last season with the settled midfield three being Polina, Lukic, and Andreas, and you've essentially taken out Joao Polina and replaced them with Smith-Rowe in like to start with, that is obviously a much more attacking midfield three than we ended the season with. So yes, like there are certain games when I think, gosh, we look like we're getting bullied in the centre of the park. We're not winning second balls enough. The rest of it, I thought Villa was a good example of that. But then also our defensive numbers are heaps better. We restrict opponents from getting into our box. It's not like we're just sort of like defending last ditch all the time. Like our box entry prevention numbers are really, really good. Like really good. Like we are defending as well as anybody in the league, and we're doing that with a more lightweight midfield and a more attacking midfield, and with a system in which Marco seems to expect everybody to run back and scrap more than he seems to make it the responsibility of one individual in the middle of the park now. So it's working. And it might not always work, and it might be that teams work it out and we do have to go to a double pivot at some point, but that's the Premier League and that's the way things are. You adapt and you change, and you make things work. And I struggle to worry too much about our defense when it looks as good as it does, both on in terms of results, in terms of the underlying numbers, and in terms of everything we're watching. We look really good at the back at the moment. So yeah, I agree on Andreas there, but it doesn't seem to be causing us too many problems. So maybe we're willing to live with it.
Talking about the defence, another question here. I think this might have been Skibby's question. Have we seen an improvement from Bassi since being paired with Anderson, or is he just doing what he normally does?
Great question. And look, I think The other thing to just say about my account stuff like that, like I'm just a dude posting stuff on Twitter like everyone else, right? So I have no unique monopoly on wisdom. So I'll try and answer all these things. But if you think I'm talking absolute nonsense, by all means, get in the comments, preferably on Blue Sky where everyone seems to be really nice. So yeah, but look on Bassi. Yes, I think we have seen an improvement from him, but I think in two ways. So one, I think that being paired with Anderson has, from a defensive standpoint, has just emphasised some of the strengths we knew he already has, which is Anderson needs somebody rapid on the cover to help him every now and then. And we're seeing that more from Calvin Bassey, who's always had that in his locker. I don't think anyone's ever really questioned that, but we just see it a bit more. So he looks better. What's really interesting is that I think part of this is because when we play out from the back, teams are so worried about Anderson, they sit off Bassey a little bit, whereas before they were getting into him quite quickly. His progressive numbers are much better. He's looking really good playing out from the back, not playing ambitious fired in balls into the midfield, which go wrong occasionally and still do. But he's sort of pulled out this sort of regular thing in his locker, which he sort of just clips a ball into Raul Jimenez's chest. Sometimes Alex Iwobi, but usually Raul Jimenez as he drops back in. And that sort of lofted ball that isn't quite a long ball seems to be getting us out of the sort of back third pretty regularly. And actually, if you look at Fulham's progressive patterns recently, we go down the left-hand side more than we do the right, even though we've got Joachim Andersen in the team, which is, I think, that teams are trying to shut that down. And we end up with either Bassey going long to somebody, or actually, and this is something which perhaps with some transfer dealings in mind we might come on to, quietly, Anthony Robinson's really improved on the ball. He's not the most aesthetically pleasing passer, and I don't think he ever will be, because he's got he moves in a slightly odd way. Like he's got too many muscles or something. I don't know what it is. He doesn't. You know, some players when they pass the ball, they just look beautiful. Whereas Jedi looks a bit awkward, but he's actually quietly doing a really good job playing out the back. And you see that his numbers now for progression are coming increasingly via passing as opposed to carrying, and that's really, really interesting. So, yes, I think Bassey has improved being paired with Anderson, but I think just the gravity of Anderson and the threat that he provides on the ball has opened up space in which quite a lot of the backline are now exploiting and looking rather good.
Yeah, good answer. I think Fulham's defence looks markedly improved from last season. I know Paulinho obviously did a lot to shield the defence and sort of get us out of trouble on more than one occasion, but having Anderson there just seems to settle everything, and it seems to almost give us an out more often than not, where if we really need to, if we're getting pressed hard, Anderson is able to put that long ball forward, and it's not just an aimless ball forward anymore. And Bassey does look a little bit calmer on the ball this season as well than last season. I think last season it looked like he always had a mistake in him, and maybe that's because he was next to Diop, who definitely always had a mistake in him. And I think that sort of calmness seems to just emanate across that backline now this season. And
he's definitely improving, isn't he?
Yeah, and the passing is good. Just even his first touch, I've noticed it just seems to be a little cleaner than it was last season. So there's definitely a huge improvement in the defence, and we're seeing it in the numbers as well. I don't know how many clean sheets we've got so far this season, but I think compared to last season, I wouldn't be surprised if it's far in excess, and I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the season our defensive record was one of our best in the league since the days of Hangland and Hughes as a backline. Let's jump into a couple more of the questions. We had one here. Let me just find it. Here we go. Is Iwobi more effective on the left or the right? And who is more effective in the build-up, Jimenez or Muniz?
That's a good question. So on the build-up one, we can do that quite quickly, I think. It depends what you want your build-up to be. If you're just trying to play over a press and challenge aerially, Rodrigo Muniz is a different league in the air to Raul. If you're trying to do something a bit more intricate and you want to try and play to someone's chest or get them to feet, I think Raul is better. So it depends whether we're trying to build up out of the back or not. And one of the things I think that's been going wrong a few times is that we've brought Rodrigo on late in games and sort of instinctively started going long, and then the ball started coming back at us and we've conceded a few. So I think that they change how we build up massively. By the way, Raul Jimenez in general play has been unbelievable this year. I mean, his engine and his sort of desire to get on the ball and carry it and bring players into play. and also get back and make tackles as well. Like his overall play outside of goals has been really good. And if I'm honest, like I totally did not see it coming. Like back end of last season, I was like, the Raul Jimenez purple patch was a purple patch, and this isn't coming back. So fair play to the man. He looks rejuvenated. Any other thoughts on Raul and Muniz, or should we go on to Iwobi?
It's a tough one for me. I love Muniz and I love what he brings to the team, but you can't argue with Jimenez's record so far this season. And I think I saw a little thread that you put together on sort of the underlying stats behind Jimenez's purple patch compared to Muniz's purple patch, and how Jimenez's is actually more sustainable. And he's playing well, and he's fitting into the style perfectly at the moment. I think I like what Muniz brings to the side, but I just can't shoehorn him into the team at the moment.
I think the shame for me is that, Muniz is young. He's, everyone's a confidence player, but I think, him having to scrap for a start against a player who's rightly achieving all the things that you mentioned, Kish. And on top of that, Raul scoring goals. I mean, even though he hasn't scored goals in the last couple of games, over the last 10 or 11 games, it's still good numbers. So it's very difficult for Muniz to break through. And I'm just wondering whether that's actually going to affect his development, because he seems like a player that needs to play, a forward that needs to play. I just wonder how much he's going to develop with endless amounts of training around exercises and 10 minutes at the end of a game when either, maybe our form is gone and we're not thinking like we are in the first 20 minutes and not executing as well as we possibly could. And we're, he's just not getting the best service. I mean, it's just one of those things. It's just how the cards fall on your career. But I feel, as I mentioned last week, when he came on a couple of weeks ago, it would have been absolutely brilliant for the guy if he'd scored, because he's likely to, be back in the shed and waiting for an opportunity, God forbid an injury or something like that. But it's going to be difficult for him to break through. The longer Raul plays very, very well and shuts him out, it's going to be very difficult for him, I think.
You got to take off the old black and white specs though sometimes with these two, because I love Muniz to bits. Raul's just not even in the same league in terms of cult hero status. Like there's just a thing like Brentford, when we made it 1-1, they took the kickoff and Muniz just battered into their centre back for no reason. But the thing is, I love that. I think that was fantastic. And it was like, oh, mate, he's like the best striker we've ever had, sort of thing. But, there's part of me which, we're getting close to January now. There's certain transfer rumours start coming up. And as soon as you start seeing some of the number 9s that we're getting linked with, I can't help but get excited and think, yeah, I think this team is a striker away from doing something extraordinary. Something very magical. And unfortunately, I don't see either of those two being the kind of one to lead us to the promised land. I don't know what you want to call it, whatever you want to say. Wherever we want to be
next level,
wherever we want to be, right? Raul Muniz doesn't fill me up with the same kind of excitement or that kind of optimism. I love them both. I love Muniz more. I mean, if we wanted to have a number 2, I think Muniz would be my man. But, I think, unfortunately, come January or in the summer, I think a striker is going to be on the chopping block, unfortunately.
Well, we'll talk about the transfer
surely
window.
Vinny's at the front of that queue, surely.
Well, I didn't even get a mention. Still there.
we will talk about the transfer. We'll talk about the transfer window, but I'll ask Kish as well, just on Iwobi, more effective on the left or the right. And I guess in turn, we've seen Adama had a really good start to the season. Reece Nelson has impressed since he's started as well and got more starts. How do you see, and obviously Harry Wilson on top of that, who's just, in the form of his life in terms of goal scoring, how do you see the whole wing situation at Fulham actually playing out over over the rest of the season?
Yes, and it's an embarrassment of riches. I mean, I personally, I know a lot of people are interested in Lukic, Berger, and what's going to happen there. I actually think that's quite simple. I think that they're going to compete for a position at 6, and that's sort of how it's going to be for a lot of games. I think what we do on the wings is really, really complicated now. I sort of think Adama moving back to being an impact sub probably makes sense because him against tired defenses is just unfair, really. And he's less likely to injure himself again. So, he did a wonderful job at the start of the season, and his numbers were bizarrely good. But I just sort of think that sort of fits. So I'm quite happy with him as an impact sub. What we do elsewhere, I think, is really complicated. For Iwobi, the reason I love him so much, and I really do love Alex Iwobi, he's sort of my star man, is that it doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter. In terms of his consistency of performance, he can be on the left, he can be on the right, he can be on the centre. He will do what he does, and he'll do it to a really high standard. And that is, as for a manager, must be an absolute dream, like an absolute dream. Now, where he's more effective for Fulham actually depends on what else we've got on the pitch. And that, I think, is a really interesting question. So I think in terms of the way that we like to play and the fact that we're quite left-hand side dominant, the triangle of Iwobi, Smith Rowe and Jedi on the left was really exciting. But actually, I think that Marco needs to have a playmaker on each side of those wide triangles that we spoke about. And Emil Smith Rowe is more than capable of being that person on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, we don't really have an equivalent. And, Kenny Tete is more than capable of making an overlapping run. Andreas Pereira is more than capable of being the man who sort of crashes into the area and runs beyond. I sort of think that we need Alex Iwobi more on the right-hand side than we do on the left-hand side. And for that reason, would leave him there. But I sort of think it doesn't really matter in terms of what he produces. Where do you guys like Alex?
On the pitch at the moment, anyway.
Agreed.
The one good thing about Iwobi is he seems to be so he's able to play in so many different positions. You can see him pop up on the left, on the right, in the centre. We see him drop deep occasionally as well into that 8. And I think that's the benefit of having him on the field in any position from the start of the game, because if we need to adapt, he's able to quickly adapt. And Marco, it's almost like he's the man that Marco calls on if we need to make a tactical change. Iwobi's the guy who switches from left to right, or switches from right to left, or goes central. And I think the benefit of having someone like that in the team is unquantifiable almost, because it's similar to what we talked about with De Cordova-Reid in the last couple of seasons, where that if you need to late in the game, he can play right back, or he can play on either wing or central midfield, and you play him up front if you really need to as well. And I think having that sort of Swiss Army knife of a player in Iwobi is sort of key to what Marco likes to do, it seems. Skibby, Dad, thoughts?
I was going to say the same. I think for me, it's all about balance. And a really good example is probably a non-Fulham example is England. For some reason, we try to fit all of our left wing or left-footed right wingers into the team, and then we lose to Greece. We suddenly put out what people would see as a second string, and we breeze past Greece and Ireland fundamentally. And I think that's the same example here. Is I like balance in a team. He may not be the quickest winger, he may not be the trickiest winger, but I think if you had Adama and Nelson on the pitch at the same time, you've got kind of too much chaos on the wings there. That it's just no real structure. And I mean, you see it at Man United all the time. You just try and fit in all your trickiest and your quickest players, and it just doesn't work. And I think that's the brilliance that Iwobi brings for us. That we've got Adama on the right at one time, and he's bringing all the chaos, bringing all the pace. They're all keeping an eye on him, and Iwobi's doing all the ugly stuff, the intricate stuff. And when we sort of took Adama out, put Nelson in on the left-hand side, Iwobi goes over to the right, and Nelson's doing all the intricate, the taking on, the really getting at his man. And Iwobi, for me, is then moved over to the other side, doing exactly what he does. So he is Mr. Consistent for me. And I think, like you say, it doesn't matter where he is on the pitch, he just fits in and just brings that essence of calm and consistency, which is really important to any team, I think, that's sort of playing at any level, really.
I need to put these out, actually, but I tried to turn those structured possession screen grabs into a graphic of like player positions. And if you look at the one on the left hand side, I don't know if we can bring that up, Jack, but if you see what we do when Kenny Tete tucks inside, the graphical ones that I put at the end of the thing, I think. Here. So if you look at this, for those on YouTube, when we play down the left-hand side and we flood the left-hand side like we do, with Nelson and Robinson running off Smith Rowe, if we lose the ball and Kenny Tete gets sucked into trying to win it back, that right-hand side is really open. And Alex Iwobi's work rate is incredible. Like even though he's nominally meant to be attacking the box, watch game in, game out, he will fill that space and almost drop in at right back, and he will get back and support his defense. And like I thought it was really interesting that you mentioned Bobby Reid, because like he is sort of like Champions League Bobby Reid. He's like sort of he does everything, and he has an incredible work rate, and it seems to be an incredible personality. And he's just general sort of star student vibes. He can sort of do it all, and that ability to get back in and help defensively is really important for us.
I think what's so interesting is we spend a lot of time talking about, who's our best starters on the wings, and everyone, I think beginning of last season, Adama was disappointing, and he probably wouldn't have been part of the conversation. Obviously, Nelson wasn't here, and Harry was hot and cold. But now we're sort of in a situation where, whilst they're all very different, well, they're all extremely different, and they're probably not even at the same level, but they do offer different things. It's very, very difficult to work out what is the best possible starting lineup, because they're so different. And the one thing you can say, if I can sort of summarize what all of you guys I think are saying, the one thing you can say is that Alex Iwobi is always in. He's always on the team sheet, because no matter what system you come up with, having chosen the other people to start, he fits. He can work. And that is very, very handy, very, very brilliant for a manager to have. So, yeah. My question to you in and around all of this, I'm not sure if it's part of other questions to come, but please let's not forget it. If it was your checkbook, would you try and get Nelson over the line and keep him?
Depends what they're asking for. If I'm honest, I'm slightly mindful that I feel like sometimes the Fulham fan base's love of Reece Nelson so far is slightly unfounded. As in, like, he's really exciting, and like I'd start him. I think he's in my starting 11 for what I think our best team is currently. I think he provides the pace in open space that Adama Traore does, but with the technical ability in closed space that he doesn't. So I think he's a really good option for us. But still early days. Like, the end product hasn't consistently been there. So I didn't love, by the way, the sort of, and I'm sure it's absolute nonsense, and I'm sure it's people trying to cause trouble, but there were some rumours that he was slightly unhappy with his playing time and was already thinking about permanent moves next and touting himself to the Bundesliga. I don't think that's a Reece Nelson thing. I think that's the press being the press thing, to be honest. But, when Fulham fans are sort of saying, 30 million, get it done, I'm not quite there yet, if I'm honest. I'd need to see a bit more before I was willing to spend that much money on somebody in a position where we're pretty stacked, if we're being brutally honest. I mean, that, for me, any money that Fulham spend, first and foremost, if they identify a striker that's worth spending 40 to 50 million pounds on, every penny that we have available should go on to buying that striker if we determine there's one who's worth it. Whether that striker exists who wants to come to Fulham, I don't know. But that, for me, is priority number one over and above anything else. And if anybody tries to argue that it should be Nelson above that, I'd disagree with them pretty strongly, if I'm honest.
Yeah, well, expanding on that, a question came in based on how Fulham have set up and progressed the ball this year. Who would the ideal new 9 be next season, or maybe in January? Or rather, what type of 9 would you expect to see? Because we do have 2 very different number 9s at the moment in Muniz and Jimenez.
Yeah, they are different. What they're both able to do, though, is that Raul in his own way can be used as an outlet to get pass to press. It's just that you have to do it slightly differently, and he ends up running towards you and you hit him on his chest rather than chucking it up in the air and asking him to compete with the giants like Ethan Pinnock or whatever that he's up against every week. So he lets you progress the ball directly. It's just in a slightly different way. So I think any Marco Silva striker needs to be of a physical profile that's big enough that means that you're able to, at the very minimum, do that. So it means that we're not going to be signing sort of a regen Jermaine Defoe or Andrew Johnson or anything like that. They're going to be a fairly large lad. But look, I think what's really interesting about Fulham's recruitment over the last couple of years is the pivot towards Premier League proven players has been stronger than ever. Like, we're not taking expensive punts on people from foreign leagues. It's just not what the club are doing. We might try and fill in a couple of extra spots in our sort of squad, but that's not what our primary aim has been. So you see that the links to Jonathan David, who's really exciting, but I think we'll probably have his eyes set on something a little bit more sparkly than Fulham. Would be great, but I'd be surprised if that were to happen. The player I really like, and I'm slightly gutted that we didn't go for already, is Liam Delap at Ipswich, who is everything that a Marco Silva striker should be, in that he's big, he can come back to goal, but he can also run behind you. He's boundless energy, eye for goal, like really, really like him. And were Ipswich, who, by the way, I have a real soft spot for, and I really like their manager, I hope they stay up. But if they weren't to stay up, I mean, Fulham should definitely be in the swim if there was a move for Liam Delap around. I wonder if already he's done enough to sort of tickle the fancies of some clubs with higher aspirations. I mean, if Newcastle were to lose Alexander Isak, for example, I wouldn't be surprised if they were in for him this summer.
Yeah, good call. Skibby, Dad, before we sort of start to wrap this one up, was there any other stuff that you guys wanted particularly to ask and to cover off on?
I think the only thing was set pieces. It seems a bit of an enigma this season. And I mean, it loosely comes back to the Andreas conversation, because everyone's blaming him for the reason why we're not sort of scoring these from corners and set pieces. But I guess I think that the real obvious absentees are Palhinha, Tosin, and Diop, because he's not starting, but they're the sort of players that I can remember were scoring from set pieces. So other than actual physique and basically just all-round eagerness to sort of get a shot on goal by a really tall, strong player, is there anything else that you're seeing from our set pieces which is just missing that you know, from a tactical perspective, is why we're not scoring? Or I don't think we've actually scored anything from a corner or a set piece this season. So why is that failing? Is it the quality of the play, or is it just the way that we're setting up, or is it just the clientele, I suppose, that's in the box?
Yeah, great question, and something I get asked a lot online, and I feel like set piece analysts are like the if you think that I think about football like a chess game, they think about football literally like a chess game, because it is a chess game, right? So it's not something that I'm a specialist at, but there are people online who do it really well that I can link you towards. And what I think is important to think about from Fulham set pieces, I divide them into two. I divide them into what we're doing from the left, particularly at corners, and what we're doing from the right. So from the left, when Andreas is taking them and he's swinging them in, I've got some data that I'll put out actually, which is that 66.67% of all of our corners from the left end up in that most dangerous zone right in front of the goalkeeper, basically. So you know this trend in the Premier League where teams try and pin the goalkeeper back and they try and whip it in with an in-swing and they get it as close to the goalie as possible, where the goalie should be but can't get to. Then you have like big units crashing in, like Gabriel, and he scores, right? We basically can do that from the from the left-hand side with Andreas. And if you look at the other teams, so only Newcastle, Arsenal, obviously, and Villa have had more balls in that zone regularly than we have from the left-hand side. So we've looked really good there. And I actually think I've put out a few examples of this on Twitter, and I could do the same on Blue Sky going forward, of where like we really should have scored from those sorts of set pieces and we just haven't. The other problem is that on the other side, we've still got Andreas taking them and they're outswingers. and we've then had 3.3% of balls hit that most dangerous area, which I'm pretty sure is the lowest in the league. So you could basically, if you say that there's a set piece meta, which is to, with in swing, get it close to the keeper with pace and whip, and you get people running onto it. We just can't do that from the right hand side because we don't have a left footer in our team capable of taking a set piece, unless Anthony Robinson and Calvin Bassey have been doing some training that I'm not aware of. So we're basically we're working on 50% of our sample size at all times to try and get an outcome. I think we've been unlucky with the ones that we do well, and I think we've looked like, if you notice, we go short or we do weird things on the other side because we know that we're not going to be able to do the conventional thing. So yeah, it is a problem. It's another argument as to why, if you find a way to get Harry Wilson into the team, you'd also get a bit extra out of him because he could take those set pieces on that side. And again, maybe if you moved Alex Iwobi inside, that's a way you could accommodate Wilson if you felt it was impossible to ignore him.
Do you think it is impossible to ignore him?
On Wilson, I'm sort of the view that if it ain't broke, don't fix it, which is that he seems to be coming on with slightly tired defenses and having had a sense of where space is, and he's finding it. And maybe you need to give him a bit longer to do that. So, 8 minutes, you can't keep on relying on him to do it in 8 minutes. Maybe he needs half an hour. But I'm quite happy with him in that role, so long as he's not sort of causing a huge drama. And he seems like a stand-up guy and not the type to do that. So if it's not broken, don't fix it. I'd say keep bringing him on and let him have his impact.
Sure.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. What I was going to say, just really back to the corners again, it feels like at least when we had Willian in the side, we did try quite a lot of different things from corners. I remember quite a lot of corners being pinged to the edge of the box and taking shots from the edge of the box, and just feels like we're not trying that quite as much this season. I don't know if you think maybe we're almost panicking a bit on corners and thinking maybe if we just get it in there, we'll be able to. Well, eventually one of them's going to go in. Do you think there's a bit of that going on?
I think there's a bit of that going on, but I'd also say that, for all the amazing Bournemouth, here's 7 touches to score a goal off a corner, that the most effective corner routine this year by a long way has just been Bukayo Saka hitting an area and Gabriel running to it. And there is just you can have as many set piece coaches as you want, and they will refine that. And let's be clear, Arsenal have a set piece coach and Fulham don't, and one of the few Premier League clubs who don't. And they can refine that and make that better and better. But it's not necessarily the most inventive thing in the world. It's just focusing on
beautifully executed.
Exactly that. I'm surprised that we don't have a set piece coach. I'd like someone to ask Marco about it. Jack Kelly, who was on your pod, is doing a great job at those pressers. I mean, maybe he can ask about set piece coaches and Marco's view on them, because he's a very progressive manager, and it's clearly that if he wanted one, we'd have one by now. So clearly he doesn't like that being a bespoke position. He likes it to be held by the coaching staff in general. But yeah, interesting.
Yeah. Am I right in saying, in addition to that, thinking beyond the corners, that this season so far we have won an astoundingly little number of free kicks in dangerous areas just outside the box? Like we just haven't won that many. I can't think of that many instances where Pereira's been called on to put a dangerous ball in from there.
Yeah,
and that's just a bit unlucky. We just haven't either conjured it or they just haven't happened.
It's a bit unlucky, but also, I mean, I don't know is the honest answer. I don't have the numbers, but it sounds plausible. I don't remember either, like you say. But the other thing I would say is that by definition, our play is majority out wide, right? So a lot of the time we're sort of working the ball wide. So you often get sort of players drifting a ball in, which is almost basically a corner as a free kick. We tend not to go through the middle that often. We tend not to be running through the sort of the centre, the middle of opponents' boxes. So maybe that's something to do with that. By the way, if you like the sort of stuff I do online, The Athletic did a good video. They did pre-season predictions, and they re-predicted the Premier League. And one of the teams they had a quick look at was Fulham, because they were like, we were way off, that they're way better than we thought they are. What's going on? And the thing they noticed was just how effectively we get the ball into that half space. So how, it's almost like it's that or nothing. Like Marco is obsessed. The ball is going into the side of the box. That is where we play our football, and we will work it and work it and work it until we can do that. because that's where good things are going to happen. So there is, like, I think, a clear focus to do that as opposed to go through the middle.
Yeah. No, very, yeah, it definitely seems that way this season. And Kish, look, a final question just to round this out and looking forward, what are your watch points for the Wolves match on the weekend?
Yeah, interesting this. I need to actually have a look at Wolves more closely. I try and do a match preview thread, so I'll do that at the end of this week. Just off the top of my head, the one thing that I've noticed on this one is that Wolves in general are very happy to play on the counter. They don't have to, but they tend to like to. I'm pretty sure they won their last game with less than 30% of possession, which is ridiculous. And this is exactly the sort of game that Fulham would struggle in previous seasons, right? I've done stuff in the past about a trend where Fulham would get their points in games where they had less possession, and then when they had more possession, they wouldn't get any points. So, and this is a game where we could monopolise the ball, but we seem better in settled play. We've been talking about that on this stream. So this will be a real good litmus test of, can we break teams down if the game goes as we expect it to. And then just the other thing, I guess, to throw in there is that I know that they and I'll have to check this again when I do a proper look into them. I know that they sometimes like to play a 5 at the back. I can't remember us playing against that many teams who've rolled a proper 5 at the back out against us this year. I'm trying to think. Nothing really comes to mind. So again, might be a bit of a sort of a test as to how we do up against that.
Any particular matchups that you see in this Wolves game as well for us to keep an eye on?
Well, I mean, they've got both Cunha and Strand Larsen. By the way, both of whom are fairly Marco Silva-ish strikers, in that they can drop off in a fairly large, in particular in Strand Larsen's case. So interested to see how Basti and Anderson deal with that. Cunha will come in short quite a lot and try and stress them out a bit. So that could be interesting. And then Rayan Nouri is a really good left wing back, pushes on a lot. Another reason why you might want to have Alex Iwobi out on that right-hand side so he can drop in and give us a bit of cover there because he's a danger.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kish, I'll push you for a prediction for the game against Wolves as well. Like you said, it's a game that we feels like one that we'd lose points in previous seasons. How do you see this one turning out on the weekend?
I mean, there's very little excuse for Fulham not to win this game, which always makes me really nervous. I'm much happier predicting it's going to be an uphill battle, but let's see where we get. I think this should be I'd like to think this could be a 2-0 win for Fulham and fairly mundane, but I've got a sneaking suspicion it won't be because it almost never is with us, apart from that Palace game, which was really relaxing for some reason.
Yeah, very true. Well, we'll be previewing this game later on this week, so do keep an eye out on that podcast. But look, Kish, this has been incredible. It's always great to have you join on the pod and talk us through everything Fulham, all the tactics, and help us and all our listeners as well get a better understanding of the way Marco likes to play football. It's really, really appreciated, and we really appreciate everything you do in the Fulham community as well. If you wanted to give your handles another plug before we finish up.
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm at Cottage Tactico on basically everything. I'm going to try and cross post to multiple platforms for the foreseeable, and let's see where we all shake up in the great social media reshuffle of 2024. But it's been a pleasure to be back on, and I like that we said to sort of come together after a while when there's enough that's happened for us to have a real deep dive into things that are changing under Marco's reign at Fulham. Fingers crossed the next time we chat, he's still our manager, because that's my nagging worry at the back of my mind, that somebody at some point is going to take him away from us. But long may it continue. It's a pleasure to watch.
And what a joy as well to get together and actually talk about positive things as well. We're not talking about where Fulham are falling down and where we're struggling. It's talking about how well Fulham are actually performing this season, how well Marco's tactics are working, and everything is bright and rosy. So let's hope when we next chat, it's similarly rosy as well, because life is good as a Fulham fan at the moment. Long may it continue. Kish, again, a huge thank you for joining us today. We really do appreciate it. Dad, thank you also for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Great to have you on, Kish. Lovely to hear your views. We're very fortunate that we've benefited from you, obviously, being unwell. Good luck to you. Obviously, nothing wrong with your brain, but if you need a sick note, you know where to come.
And Skibby, thanks for joining today.
Always a pleasure. And yeah, as you say, I'm learning all the time. We chat, Kish, and I'm really looking forward to the next time, which is probably where we talk about how, Robinson nullified Mbappe in the Champions League. So that would be really exciting. So thank you very much.
Let's hope we chat slightly sooner than that.
You mean that never conversation?
That'll happen for sure. And I look forward to sending Kish my Football Manager save in the next couple of weeks as well, for him to put together a stellar tactic for me again.
See, every time you brag about something on Football Manager, it's always come out that Kish has done all your tactics anyway. What do you actually do apart from press play?
I just sign the players and Kish makes the magic happen.
You're like Chris Coleman and Steve Keane here.
The tactics don't really matter. I love the tactics, but essentially, if you recruit the right players, you'll win. So,
Don't say that, Kish. It's all you. It's all you.
Sounds like a Wrexham formula.
Thank you again, guys. Really do appreciate everyone jumping on for this one. As always, please do make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Check us out on all our platforms, on Blue Sky, on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, everywhere you find your social media pipes. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcasts, we're available. We really do appreciate you sharing us as well with other Fulham fans so we can continue to grow. And jump on the Discord as well, a great community of like-minded Fulham people. So thank you again to everyone who's joined on the live stream. Thank you very much again to Kish. And as always, come on, you Whites.